One of the fun things about making dioramas is that you're not hemmed in by the historical specifics that you are with a tank or a figure or something like that. So I don't know where Montgomery and his generals went to the bathroom when they were out in the field in Northwest Europe during World War II. But with these two kits, I can extrapolate that and imagine it and create a scenario where Monty and his officers are out in the field standing next to their very own personal latrine, reading their own news clippings. And let's face it, if anyone in the European theater of operations in World War II was going to be reading their own press clippings, it would definitely be Montgomery. And Pat, maybe James Gavin, Ike to a certain extent, but hey, you don't get 4 or 5 stars on your chest if you're not a little bit egotistical. So without further ado, let me take you to the fields of Northwest Europe in the fall of 1944 for one very, very important latrine. Pretty standard stuff to start with here. I've got a little square of XPS foam I cut, covered the top layer with AK Interactive's dry earth rather. And then I went back and I put the latrine and this barrel on it to kind of lock it into place and work around it. You don't have to do it that way, but that's just the way I did. And I went back and touched up some of the earth again because it had some cracks in it and I just wanted to thin it out. So next step is pretty standard stuff too. I took some dirt, mixed in with a little tiny gravel, and I cut little tiny pieces of twine and mixed it in there too to kind of represent dead grass. I spread it out on top and locked it in place with some watered down PVA glue. All right, once that was dry, I came back with some brown primer and covered the top layer of dirt. Once that top layer of paint was dry, I came back, put a few tufts of grass in a few different places to kind of give it a few, places where the grass was a little bit longer. And then I came in with the static grass applicator, spread a little static grass and shook off the excess and let it dry. One thing to be aware of when you're working with static grass is don't get too thick with the PVA glue. It just dries weird, it doesn't look right. You want to avoid the big clumps of PVA glue underneath your static grass. Once the static grass dried, I came back and I sprayed Tamiya flat earth around most of the open dirt in between the grasses, things like that. That gives it kind of another nice layer of dirt color to it. And then after that was on there, I came back with some Tamiya buff to give it some dry dirt look. That it was time to bust out the acrylics and start painting some of those rocks. I used a few different colors. I used an orange brown, I used a stone gray, I used a dark brown. You can kind of see, it just kind of makes those rocks pop out a little bit and give you a little bit of extra color in the earth setting there. So I think Monty gets a little bit of a bad rap in the United States. I think a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with Omar Bradley's memoir he wrote after the war. He trashed Monty in it. And then you got to think too, Bradley's book then becomes the basis for Patton, the movie. That's where the narrative of Monty being overly concerned with planning, overly concerned with set piece battles, taking his own sweet time to get to Caen and unlock the eastern edge of the Normandy front during that campaign. And it's really not entirely justified. Once you make it to the big screen like that, that narrative tends to get locked in. I don't know if a latrine diorama is the best way to honor General Montgomery, but I think at the very least it humanizes him, right? Once the rocks were painted, I came back in with the enamel washes, and I just kind of wanted to give it some darker effects, wetter effects, just kind of around some of the grasses and a few places here and there on the earth, just to give it a little tonal variation, just to kind of make some of the stuff stand out a little bit more. Just create some shadows around some of the rocks, things like that. Another enamel effect I did use on this one, I used some of the green moss stuff from Ammo, enamel moss effects from Ammo, and I just kind of used that to give it a little bit, you can kind of see around the base of the latrine to kind of give it a little more lifelike color to it, you know, where moss and mold and mildew and stuff like that kind of builds up at the bottom of the wood as it sits out in the wet dirt and earth and the rains of Northwest Europe. I wanted to throw some kind of water effect into it, specifically a way so that these guys could wash their hands after they use the latrine. So I grabbed a bucket, a galvanized bucket, added a little rust effect to it, and glued it on top of that oil drum that's sitting out there. All right, this is one of my favorite parts of the diorama. You can't have a latrine if you don't have stuff to read, right? I took some Mod Podge, watered it down just a little bit, glued it together, and put it into the diorama. But I wanted to kind of have a little fun with it, so it's a little out of scale so that you can kind of see it a little easier. In the bathroom, you've got a Life magazine with Princess Elizabeth on the cover of it. And then you've got this newspaper sitting on the crate out here that's, you know, with a headline about Dempsey coming up to the Belgian border. To put my figures on, I have drilled a little hole in their foot and use a kind of a snip of paper clip and then push them down into the diorama. I think to me, it's a little easier to place them that way than just to try to glue them on. I just used some glue to glue Time magazine into Monty's aide's hand here, and that way he and Monty can be looking at Monty on the cover of Time magazine. I'm sure they're all very flattered by appearing in the press like that. And there you have it, a nice wooden latrine somewhere in the middle of a field in Northwest Europe, while Monty and his aides look over their own press clippings. Or as they knew it.